So I'd like to officially welcome all of you this afternoon to the Stockbridge Library's online poetry series. We are still going strong in season 3 of our program, and this season our theme is inquiry and the power of poetry in both asking and answering questions. Before I introduce today's poet, I would like to introduce John Gillespie, who 3 years ago, as the pandemic hit, was the president of the Board of Trustees here at the Stockbridge Library. John has a tremendous passion for poetry and is a very driven individual and has brought us together every Thursday for 3 years to share poetry. So John, thank you very much. Yeah. And also I'd like to thank Joshua Michael Stewart for joining us today. Joshua will be sharing his work with us. He has 2 full-length collections of poetry, Break Every String from 2016, and his most recent collection, The Bastard Children of Dharma Burns. And he also has 2 chapbooks, Vintage Gray and Sink Your Teeth into the Light, which is a great title. And he also has poems that have been published in the Massachusetts Review, Rattle, Cold Mountain Review, the Evansville Review, Brilliant Corners, as well as some other publications. Joshua, thank you for joining us. I will turn the program over to you, John, and you, Joshua. Thank you to both.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you for continuing to host. We just finished our 4th National Poetry Month, which was, I think, a lot of fun. So I'm going to start a little bit different today. I'm going to start with a quote. Now, Kathy, take notes. Maybe you need a quote to start your in a couple of weeks. A quote from Tony Hoagland about Joshua Michael Stewart. There's a fearlessness in Joshua Michael Stewart's collection, Break Every String. Tough, tightly written narratives and monologues about living poor with broken people, some of whom are your closest relatives in hard times. This heartfelt, gritty work reminds me of the hardscrabble accounts of humanity in some of our best poets. The work of A.I., Bruce Weigel, and Linda McCarris's landmark book, Eva Marie. Stewart exercises the courage of truth-telling and takes the revenge of real poetic craft. As Bruce Weigel said, say it clearly and you make it beautiful no matter what. And I love this one. Or as Stewart says, poets are the battered spouses of hope. You can't help but respect the maker of these streamlined vehicles for his guts and his unsentimental, vivid poems. Well, I tell you, Joshua, that tee up where, you're now at the pantheon of expectation.
Yeah.
That's good. All good. It's nice to be able to share that with everyone. So share with us what inquiry means to you.
Well, thinking about it, the word that keeps coming to me is exploration. When I write poems, it's more of an exploration than it is, I guess, inquiry. Inquiry makes me think of searching out an answer, whereas exploration is kind of like just like the journey. And that's what interests me the most. As a writer of poems, I love the idea of not knowing where I'm heading, not knowing where I'll end up. And with query too, every time I sit to write a poem, the first question is, well, what the hell am I going to write about now? So I guess the exploration is what I'm most interested in.
So when you start, are there times when you are sitting down to write and you have a question in mind, or is it half the time or some part of the time there's just, you're sitting down there like, what am I doing here?
More the latter. What I usually do is I like to make games for myself. I'll say, okay, like instead of having a question or a subject matter I'm going to write about, I'll have like a form or some sort of idea. So I'll say, okay, I'm going to write sonnet, but I'm going to write a sonnet in prose poem style. Or I'm going to like one poem that I'll read. What I did was I was like, okay, I'm going to write a memoir from the first 10 years of my life, from 1978 to 1988, in 100 sentences. And the sentences don't have to be in chronological order. They don't have to necessarily connect, but I'm just writing 100 true sentences, true interesting sentences that have something to do with my life at that time. And then once I had those 100 sentences, then I was able to see how they connected and put them together and form the poem. And
Are you
so I do,
you gonna read that for us today?
yes, I am.
That's good. Yeah, I'm trying to
I-
do that from my life, 1955 to 1965, but it's like 60 years ago. Trying to comb the memories back here somewhere and pull them forward. So that's great.
Yep,
That's a nice challenge for yourself. You know, for first 10 years of your life in 100 lines. Really nice, really nice.
right. And then, and
So,
also that you can, that when you move the lines around, that's when you can do some real editing and either completely delete lines or, say, well, this line would match, but there's something missing. So you add something in the middle and things like that. I like the game of it.
yeah, great. So what questions are you navigating right now?
Right now, not much of anything. I'm just always exploring new ways of writing. Um, I've been writing, virtually every day for the past 25 years. So it gets pretty tiring just looking at a blank page. So I'm always trying to find new ways of writing. I've been writing a lot of prose poems lately. Um, I love hard-boiled mysteries. So I've been playing with the idea of writing a book of like a hard-boiled mystery, but written in either in flash fiction or in prose poems. Um, I'm always concerned that I never want to be one of those poets who gets stuck writing the same thing over and over again. So I'm always trying to find new subject matter.
So why don't you read a few of your poems for us?
I will. So I'll read you the poem that I was mentioning before. It's in my first book, Break Every String.
Yeah.
And the whole book is a memoir of my time growing up in Ohio. And also I read this poem because if there's like one poem that kind of demonstrates my work as a whole, I guess it would be this one. Someone once said in another interview I did that my poems were a balance between beauty and brutality. And I think this poem is a good example of that.
Wow.
This is entitled Born in the USA. We were pumping our fists with Springsteen, chanting the chorus as Reagan galloped the campaign trail, still pretending to be a cowboy. And the old man who lived in the blue house with the white fence lined with rose bushes was handing out mints from a bowl made out of a buffalo skull. Uncle Bob chopped off his thumbs in a metal press on his first day on the job. My father returned to Quezon, sleepwalking past our bedrooms, shouting out the names of Smoke and Moon. He had a woman he loved in Saigon, sang the boss. Across the bay, Ferris wheel lights and roller coaster screams. Child services found my grandmother unfit to adopt. An ambulance in front of the blue house with the white fence lined with rose bushes, a white sheet, the bones and feathers of a dead seagull, a shipwreck on a rocky shore lapped by green waves. On their lunch break, my father, my uncles, and both my grandfathers, their names embroidered on their grease-stained shirts, stepped out of the factory and coughed up their paychecks to their wives idling in Regals, Novas, and Gremlins. Out by the gas fires of the refinery, my father's handlebar mustache terrified me. My brother built me castles out of blankets and chairs, larger than the house that confined them. Taught me how to leap off the couch like Jimmy Superfly Snuka, how to moonwalk and breakdance. He'd go on to teach me that disappointment's a carcinogen. My father took cover behind a lazy boy in his underwear. My grandmother offered a pregnant runaway a place to stay in exchange for her baby. When the plant relocated to Mexico, my father brought home a pink slip heavier than a Huey hog. The rose bushes became thorny switches. Over ham steaks and mashed potatoes, our parents poured out their divorce. We had to decide who we wanted to live with before leaving the table. I'd go wherever my brother went. That meant mom. My father took a job out of state. My mother took a boyfriend who dragged his unemployment into a bar called The Pit, then staggered into the house, knocking over houseplants. And I was the one ordered to clean the carpets with the wet, dry vac. We'd sneak out of the house at 3 a.m. to swim in the neighbor's pool or ping rocks off hurtling freight trains. The city condemned the blue house with the paint-chipped fence. My mother's eye blackened. We slept in parks better than home. She stood at the sink, sobbed, rubbed blood splotches out of the white jacket with a soapy sponge, wouldn't press charges. My brother bought a dime bag and a revolver from a guy named Kool-Aid. My mother was crowned a welfare queen and drove a Cadillac assembled out of political mythology. I smoked my first joint on the roof of a movie theater with my brother and the stars. An after-school ritual, stepping over the passed-out boyfriend to grab a Coke out of the fridge. We spray painted gang insignias across the boarded up windows of the blue house with the splintered teeth. The boyfriend could whip up one hell of an omelet. We didn't hate him on Sunday mornings. My mother's stitches. We swiped a bottle of Mad Dog, drank it while eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. My mother stashed bottles of gin in the leather boots my father bought for their last Christmas together. Twice they called me into the principal's office because a knife fell out of my pocket at recess. We turned abandoned factories into playgrounds, busted out the windows with tornadic rage. Somebody was asking for it and somebody was going to get it. I overheard a teacher tell my mother he's going to grow up to kill somebody. Thanks to the Black Panthers, this white boy had free breakfast at school. My brother waited until the boyfriend was drunk on the toilet to burst in swinging a baseball bat. Later that night, while taking a bath, I fished out a tooth biting me in the ass. Backholes and bulldozers devoured the blue house with the collapsing roof. We rewound and played back the catastrophic loss that plumed over Cape Canaveral on our VCRs. Boyfriend slammed a stolen van into a tree. She'd pour me a bowl of Cheerios, pour herself a scotch. The boyfriend's dentist kept good records. I'm sending you to your father. Son, don't you understand now? Front page news. Firefighters dousing the mangled inferno. Got in a little hometown jam. I stood before a judge, pled guilty to shoplifting Christmas lights, the kind that twinkle.
Woo!
I know it's a bit long one, but
yeah, talk about a roller coaster life.
yeah.
So, wow. No, thanks for capturing that. It's so many images. your relatives giving their paychecks to their wives in cars, and just so many things. There were so many. Yeah, I don't think I got on top of a movie theater to smoke a joint, so maybe I need to put that on the bucket list. Yeah, yeah. No, really, Michael just said, wow, striking, so descriptive. Wendy, heartbreaking, profound, beautifully written, so good. No, just uh, amazing capture. You had a lot of material to work with. I mean, let me ask you this. Was there just one boyfriend that your mother had after your dad left? Or it sounds like someone got whacked on the toilet, someone fell asleep in the chair, maybe didn't wake up. I don't know. It seems like there's
That was all the same guy, actually. Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And did you
And
go to live with your dad?
yeah, well, that's why I'm in Massachusetts now, because I was originally from Ohio, and then um, after getting in some trouble, I ended up moving out here to live with my dad.
Oh,
So, and then that changed my life completely.
yeah.
So,
Good.
so should I read more?
No, keep
or
going. No, keep going. Keep going.
Okay. I will actually, I want to say just a little correction. My actual newest collection is called Love Something,
Yeah.
Main Street Reg, and I'll read something from here. This is a prose poem, and people tend to like this one. So I'll read this. It's called Yellow. I'm wearing my yellow robe, drinking coffee out of a yellow mug that has a rooster on it. When I take coffee into my mouth, I hold off from swallowing and let my tongue believe it's taking a luxurious bath. Traffic swooshes down the street. People are busy being busy. For hours, I've been planning a trip to the end of the driveway to pick up the newspaper. Ravens bicker with each other out in the yard. Cats circle my chair, beg to be let out to murder. Each day we inch our way toward death. One day, without knowing it, we buy the clothes we'd be buried in. We smile for a camera that snaps the shot that'll be used for our obituary. I'll probably die in this robe, but until then, I'm going to eat some waffles that come in a box that's also yellow. Often, when children draw the sun, they'll either use a yellow or orange crayon. The older, more advanced children will use both. In kindergarten, there was this kid who drew his sons in big blood red circles. The teacher once asked him why he chose red for his sons, and he said, "This is how I see it. This is how it is in my world."
Ooh. Yeah, I love some of the description. I love the hours contemplating a walk down the driveway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, this is a good poem that about exploration,
Yeah,
where it all started off with, well, I'm just gonna write sentences about all things yellow.
yeah,
And so I was doing that. And then also while I'm writing about things yellow, I'm looking around my apartment, looking out the window, and there's literally the ravens outside the window, my cats wanting to go outside to eat them. And then there's also the play, because ravens or crows, a group of
yeah,
crows is called a murder. So that's where the word murder came in. And then
yeah,
because of that, that made me think of death in general. And then writing about, someone's death, then I was like, well, I want to return back to yellow.
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
how I got to the yellow waffles. And so that's how
yeah,
this poem is a good example of exploration.
yeah. Great.
So I'll read this one. This is also in my new one, Love Something. I wrote this because a lot of people would ask me how I got into poetry. And this poem explains why. Those who know me or know my work know my three loves is poetry, my cats, and music, specifically jazz and blues. And it's through music, through jazz and blues, that led me to poetry. So this poem is entitled Long Distant Love and Blues. My dad met Bing Crosby on a beach in California. My mother was born in the same town as Rosemary Clooney. We'd watch White Christmas religiously, sometimes in summer. Even when jazz was still a mystery, I longed to be the lost grandson of Louis Armstrong, despite my pale complexion. I owe the first flurry of notes I heard from bird saxophone to a Clint Eastwood movie. My passion for poetry didn't come from reading Dickinson or Frost, but birthed from flatted fifths that swung me towards the beat and the rhythms of Langston Hughes, and to the Mingus and Bud Powell poems of William Matthews. So, believe this, I'm a Coltrane solo that can barely contain myself when you step off that Amtrak train. And when it's time for you to hop back on again, I'm those cold night melodies Sonny Rollins played on that empty bridge.
Great. Well, Joshua, let's take a little break here and allow the audience to provide some comments or questions. For those that it's first time we have this, we have a couple of breaks during the show where you can ask some questions, provide some comments, just unmute yourself or raise your hand. Michael?
Yeah, quick
Yeah.
question. Yeah, thank you, Joshua. I appreciate, really appreciate these poems, and I'm curious about the first poem, "Born in the USA." Did you? And I don't know if you said this, but I thought you said that. Was this the opening poem of a collection of yours? Or
It is actually, yes.
Okay, yeah. Well, I found that, yeah, to me that's fascinating because it's almost as if in that longer poem being your opening poem, it sets the, feels like it sets the framework for, here's what's I'm showing you. This is a big epic start, and oh boy, get ready, because now I'm going to start to show you maybe pieces of this and kind of
Right.
dig deeper
Well,
into it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, a lot of times when I do readings, I'll say this is my overture to this book, because a lot of the things, just like what you said, a lot of the things that I kind of just mention in flashes, I explore deeper in other poems.
Wow, excellent.
So yeah,
Yeah, overture. Yeah, that fits even better. Yeah,
yeah,
epic. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Kathy, 1 second before
Yeah.
you ask something. So for the people that are on for the first time, I always have to make my, poet humor joke. Don't let the poet off easy. This is the time to grill religiously, flip over and grill again. No, we want people to have a chance to interact. So Kathy, go ahead.
Okay, well, first, I just want to say I was fascinated with your answer to that question because there's so much in that poem. I feel like I have to read it 10 times because I can't process it all in the, single reading. But that would entice me to want to read the rest of the book because I want to know what those, deeper dives would be into each of those things. And it reminds me a little bit of Gregory Orr's teaching book that he assigns students I remember exercises, and he asks them to go for 10 pages. And I usually think, oh, if I assign my students 10 pages of I remember, that they'll want to kick me. But they usually do enjoy doing it for 2 or 3. And I just see the value of that even more by looking at or listening to your poem, because it's not just about finding the 1 or 2 images that, you know, you remember that you want to elaborate on, but the potential for mining so many things and putting them together in one poem is fascinating to me. And I really like the way that you use the blue house as a refrain through the whole
Yep.
piece.
Yeah, there's a lot, there's the memories, there's that refrain, but then because it's also called Born in the USA, and it mentions Springsteen in the first line, and I'm actually quoting that song throughout that throughout as well, which if you read the poem, those lines are in italic.
Yes. Okay.
So yeah, and it's good because like you said, the more you mine, the more you're going to find. So if you're just doing it for one page or 2 pages, you're just scratching the surface. Whereas, you know, when you're like, I got to write 100 lines, then you're really having to dive deep, and then you're finding yourself writing about things that you had no intention to write about.
Yes. Yeah, I love
So,
that. Thank you.
yeah, and also I should mention, a lot of people, when they hear that, they think I modeled it after Ginsberg's Howl,
Mm.
which I did not. But what did influence me and this idea was Ron Silliman and his poem called Albany, in which that's an epic poem that I think, I could be wrong, but I believe it took him like 30 years to write. And it's just, and it's a poem that he just keeps adding to it and adding to it and adding to it. And I think the final product is like it's an epic poem that's like over 300 pages long.
Wow.
So I didn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
But wow, that's really interesting. And I was also reminded of just stream of consciousness, just as as an
Yep.
idea that I don't often think of writing in that approach when I'm writing poetry, and I'm excited to try it actually.
yeah, well, it does have that feel, because, and I based this on Ron Silliman's poem, because one thing he mentions is that when we remember, we don't necessarily remember in chronological
Mhm.
order. So
Right.
there's no need for that. So, but what is interesting is it's kind of um stream of consciousness, and it's not in order, but it's also very narrative at the same time. There is a story there.
Right. Right.
So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Great.
Thank you.
Jerice, did you want to ask a question or?
Yes, thank you, Joshua, for inviting me. I'm enjoying your reading so much, and I wanted to ask you, how do you deal with the vulnerability of the content that you write, because it's so extremely powerful? How do you come to terms with being able to put it out into the world?
For me, it is, to be honest, it's quite easy. I am an open book. Everything that I have gone through in my life, everything I have experienced has made me who I am. So I don't shy away from anything. When people first meet me, within the first half hour, you'll learn that my mother was an alcoholic, that my brother drank himself to death, that I got in trouble with the law when I was a kid. Though I retired that when I was about 13. But so I'm very open. I'm very open, and I don't know where that necessarily comes from. But it's easy for me to write about these things. And I guess the question would come up, if, like, what if family members heard these stories, and that, what would they say or whatever? And I don't really, to be honest, I don't really I don't worry about it, because everything I write is true. It might not be true in the exact same way that it's in the book. Poetry is fiction, but everything I've written is true. And my attitude for better or worse, is if you didn't like it, you shouldn't have allowed it to happen in the first place. So,
Great. So let's go back to some poems. Michael, I'm going to put a seatbelt on now for the second part of the show because I'm sure Josh is going to ratchet it up here. Love it.
Okay.
Love it.
so, okay, here's a good example. Also from Love Something. So this, again, is how you know, the exploration, how does poems come about? And you know, there's always that question, like, if you could meet your younger self, what would you say to them? And so I was thinking of that question, and my idea was the kid I was at 13 and 12 years old living in Ohio is so vastly different than the adult I became that I wouldn't even recognize this kid. I wouldn't even know really what to say. I mean, like that kid is so distant from me that he's dead. That was the thing that came to my mind. That kid is so far away from me, that kid is dead. And then that idea brought this poem, and it's called Elegy for Who Elegy for Who I Once Was. Summer, we were walking a country road before dawn, and you were dead. I don't remember your dying, but there you were, dragging your feet, your eyes like the bottoms of glass ashtrays. Your breath, I said it smelled of death, and you just groaned. I felt like an idiot. I never wanted this. I never wanted it to rain. You have any idea what a soggy corpse is like so early in the morning? I tried to pick up the pace, but all you could do was slosh down the road. Eventually, we came to a barn and hobbled inside to get dry. Soon the sun was up, the rain had stopped, and the insects were getting jiggy in the fields. You slumped into an empty stall. Sunlight beamed through the slits in the boards, and the dust of your body mingled with the dust of the barn, the outside world, and possibly me. Despite the decay, you look lovely disappearing like that. And I confessed, if I wasn't such a fool, I'd love you right down to the bone. Vultures usually do. It was the first thing you said all morning.
Wow.
I want to, if I can find the thing, here it is. I want to read a poem that is, this is more in a form, which unfortunately I don't remember the name of the form, but I stole it from the poet John Yao. And this is entitled The Working, Industrial Ohio, 1985. White and black kids shuffle through the reduced lunch line. Their mothers and fathers stand in the rain to apply for the same jobs. In kindergarten, I refused to accept a cookie from a classmate because of the color of her skin. Like me, she lived next to the rail yard. Our mothers and fathers waited in the rain to apply for the same jobs. When the trains rattled her windows, mine rattled in rhythm. Because of the color of her skin, she lived next to the rail yard. I'm trying to sand down the edges of a jagged life, thinking of that boy who refused to accept a cookie from his classmate. In front of a mirror, I traced the lines of my grandfather's face. I'm sanding down the edges of a jagged life. How do you continue to love the ones who taught you to hate? In front of a mirror, I work to erase the lines of my grandfather's face. I want to get down to the micro, to the singular, to nose touching nose. How do you continue to love the ones who taught you to hate? Son, your inheritance is the burnt, busted out mouths of abandoned factories. I'm getting down to the micro, to the singular, the nose touching nose. We are blood, brain, and bone. We are ours. We've inherited the busted out mouths of abandoned factories. We shuffle towards the future in the reduced lunch line. We are blood, brain, and bone. We are ours. It's time we train in rhythm, time we rattle some windows.
Hmm.
I'll read this one. This one is for my father. Who, because of him taking me in, he is a quiet hero for me. It's funny because I'm a poet, and language and words are my thing, but he has taught me that the old adage, actions is louder than words. He doesn't like to talk much, but he shows his love through his actions. And this is in Break Every String. And in that first poem, I do mention my father. And here is where I, explore my father further. This poem is entitled Functional. My father won't read poetry. He taught my brother the ways of paintbrush and canvas, but played guitar before I was born, but after Nam lost interest, saw no sense in art. I'd like to think, surviving war, I'd see no better reason to create, proclaim, and praise. I am here. But what do I know, given my armed conflict with the self? My father once cradled a dying soldier, missing everything below his waist, and watched a starving boy convulse after a sergeant handed the child a candy bar. His body no longer understood food. My father pulls shoulder muscles as he masons walls, lays foundations. He cracks knuckles against engine blocks, corking wrenches. Because the dead remind him that splinters in his palms are gifts, he builds cabinets, chairs, houses. His life is work, no room for self-indulgence or anything frivolous. But don't we also live in rooms not constructed out of lumber and stone? Art is an alarm clock. Art is a ladle of beauty lifted to the lips. My father, on the table, he planed, sanded, stained, where we've sat together after a long time of not sitting together, where we've eaten slow. I want him to dance, and afterwards, I want him to see the scuff marks on the pine as affirmations of purpose, of loving the lost with raucous praise, of letting the gone go.
Another powerful, personal experience, really. Are there any, before you read this one, I'm sure there are other poems that aren't so much about your personal experience, where you're debate?
Yeah.
Once again, you can read, you've got your plan. You don't have to disrupt your plan of reading, but I'm just wondering, no, I love the personal poetry. I love it. I could listen to it all day and night. I just didn't know if there was as another side to the coin, where you're delving into other things in obviously the beautiful way that you've done so far.
Yes, I guess I always bring a little bit of myself in everything I do.
You can
A
just
lot
stay
of
with what you're
times,
going to do. Don't go crazy trying to find stuff. Just stay with what you're going to do. It's all right.
yeah. All right.
It was just more of a
Well,
question. Yeah.
yeah, I do, like lately, not so much in the books I've published, but lately, I've been doing a lot of prose poems and flash fiction where they're more in third person,
Yeah.
and they're more just fictional stories. But those will be in book 4. So here's one. This is called Air Guitar, another music one. Out of all my instruments, the most prized, the one I allow no one to touch, the color of sunlight and atmosphere. And when tilted the right way, as if you were going to play it like a violin, the faint hint of turquoise. I perform best with the blinds drawn and the lights off. The electric lime of the Pioneer reverberation stereo receiver is enough to keep bare toes from jabbing into table legs, knuckles cracking against door jambs while windmilling. After work, after I've uncorked the bottle, the wine granting my first wish, I slide under the strap and unravel my fingers on West Montgomery licks. And it's well past midnight when I staccato through the house, chugging on hell's bells as I rock on my heels, balancing on flame tips. And it's long after the bars on Pleasant Street have closed, the sidewalks overflowing with feedback and faces bent out of tune, that I play along with the song they're humming, the one about home and how it's a quarter tone, somewhere between C and C sharp, and how we remarkably find the right key.
Beautiful.
This one is called Snow Angels. And air guitar is the same way of where I would pick an object and I would just meditate on that object and write series of lines about that object. And that's, I guess that's one of my ways of creating poems is I write numerous lines. And then after I have like 3 or 4 pages, that's where I find the best lines and how lines connect and see where the story's going. So this is one of those poems, Snow Angels. Each night they stare into the sky and wonder why, even with wings, they can never get off the ground. Good reason for their creator to take 3 steps, cock his head, and disown his gift to the world. Abandonment, a likely origin of anyone's lack of faith, and faith precisely what's needed to soar in the purple abyss of winter. We step out into our lives like suns slicing between buildings and perform this one angelic act that melts from our consciousness. We return to our houses to accomplish something important, leaving behind the ones who don't know any better, who see the wings as open arms, snow as flesh, and are willing to lie back down. So, I'll read this one. So in my book, Love Something, the way it was created was Break Every String took me 17 years to write. And then afterwards, I was like, well, what am I going to do now? And reading back through Break Every String, I was like, wow, this is really depressing. So I wanted to write a book that is more about affirmation, about praise, and about the things I love, which is most, poetry and music and art itself. So there are a lot of poems in here that are dedicated and directly speaking to other poets. And this poem I wrote for the Native American poet Adrian C. Lewis, who, when I wrote this, he was still alive, but unfortunately he has passed. And when he writes, he often will write his poems as if they were like open letters. A lot of his poems read like you've just stumbled on a letter he wrote to somebody. So I captured that same style when I wrote this poem for him. And it's titled Buried Deep as a Bullet for Adrian C. Lewis. Adrian, when my mother told me my great-grandfather was a full-blooded Sioux, my only question was, when can I get a horse and a bow and arrows? If she said our ancestors were dragons, I would have shot snot out of my nose to breathe fire. But the stupid kid, me, who grew up and stopped believing everything his mother says, he became a stupid adult who believes in nothing except death. He wonders what a Sioux was doing farming tobacco in Kentucky hills, wonders about documents that prove tribal enrollment, reservation assignment, and finds nothing but family folklore. It's one thing to dream you're a star quarterback and another to believe you were always on the team and then learn you never even made the roster. There's a pride that doesn't belong to you. Just another thing white men have stolen. I carried that pride jutting out of my breast pocket, pulled it out at kindergarten show and tell, scratched a black X on my college application. I love to hate the other side of me, the white side of me, the forked tongue, the Wazitshu. By the time I was 10, I could name more warriors and chiefs at the Battle of Little Bighorn than I could name US presidents. I've often dreamed of pissing on Custer's grave. In the 3rd grade, my teacher displayed Thanksgiving cutouts, turkeys, and cornucopias, pilgrims and multicolored corn. I told her about my great-grandfather, and she said, "You must be very proud." And I was. I loved my great-grandfather more than anyone else dead a year before I was born. I sat tall in my seat, raised my hand high when there was a picture of buffalo in the textbook. My whole body shimmied when the teacher turned my way. I was ready to be called to the front to lecture on what it was like to be one of America's first people. But instead she said, thanks to Indians, bison went almost extinct. My jaw unlatched. I shook my head because even in 3rd grade, I knew the fur trade wiped out the buffalo. But before I could speak my utter disgust, she shot a finger in my direction and said, "Keep quiet. You don't know everything about Indians." I told my mother and she was irate, but not enough to go down there and knock the teeth out of that bitch's mouth. Hell, if the teacher said that shit today, she'd be out of a job, slapped with a lawsuit, but not in 1982. It turns out I wasn't even Native. By the time I learned this, the last thing I wanted to be was exactly what I was, a white guy who called himself Indian. I stopped talking about my great-grandfather, going to powwows, searching for some kind of connection through thunder drum and ancestral song. Stopped thinking I belonged. But Adrian, that teacher's sneer is buried deep as a bullet, unremovable, too close to the spine, even if it wasn't meant for me.
Beautiful. So Joshua, let's take a little mini break here.
Okay.
And I didn't know, Ruth, if you wanted to read what you put in the chat. Ruth said something really nice in the chat, and I don't know how to really pronounce that word with the L specifically, so I figured you could just read it.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad to hear this reading because these poems are wonderful, and I don't usually like so-called confessional poetry, but these poems are never sentimental or self-pitying or whatever you want to call it, and the connections are really startling and true. And I also really like the way you're talking to each other. I usually don't like it when poets speak in between poems. I like it when a poet just gets up and gives a reading and that's that. But the way you all are talking to each other is very warm-hearted and plain, and I'm just enjoying the whole thing very much. So thank you.
Great, great.
Thank you.
I have to leave a few minutes early, but that's no reflection on the reading.
Great. No, Ruth, thanks a lot. Anybody else have any comments, questions? I guess, oh, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, again, I just want to say how much I appreciate the poems and the idea about, you know, Joshua, your comment about being an open book and how I think it was Tony Hooligan had said, you know, in a sense that you were fearless. And that's really, to me, that the first person narrative and opening up like that is fearless. It's a, you know, it's a tough thing to sometimes do, but I admire how you've been able to do that and successfully, you know, so it's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We have about 6 minutes left, so we have time for a couple more poems.
Okay. Let's see if I can do some more lighthearted ones, or at least not as where is my January poem? Oh, I'll read this one. Well, I'll read that second. All right. I didn't really read much from this book. This book, The Bastard Children of Dharma Bums, it's split into two sections. The first section is actually eraser poems, where I took Jack Kerouac's novel, The Dharma Bums, and I blacked out the entire novel, leaving only certain words open, and then those words became poems. So there's 32 chapters in his book, or 35 chapters, 34 chapters. So there's 34 poems. And then when I printed the book, instead of having all the black lines, I just took the words and made them into regular poems, but left them in the order in which they fall within the novel. And unfortunately, I won't read any of those, but the second half of the book is more my exploration. I love classical Japanese and Chinese poetry. I'm a student of Buddhism, so that's also part of my life. And there are haikus and tankas and things like that in this book, but also more nature poems and more shorter surrealistic poems. So I'll read a couple of those. This is called Sitting at the Picnic Table at the Quabbin Reservoir. Muddy bird prints on the pine board top. I want them to belong to eagles or hawks, but convinced they're of duller feathers. I'm unschooled in avian tracks, but read that the Chinese alphabet was inspired by foul feet in snow. There's a rustling behind a boulder, and from behind appears a ruffed grouse. It clucks, pecks at the ground. Shaped like a football awaiting kickoff, it struts my way on three-pronged toes that match the impressions on the picnic table. I zoom lens skyward, scoped autumn canopy for falcon, vulture, other birds of prey. And here in reddish and copper plumage, the thing I tried to find in a raptor's soar, stops next to me on the bench and stares up with one brown eye. And this short little poem is more of a little surrealistic poem. The title is in Latin, which is Ignes Fatui, which is Latin for anything deluding or misleading. A literal translation is foolish fires. What you've mistaken for a monocle is a dewdrop dangling from my eyelash. And what you thought were semaphores zigzagging in the field last evening was the pell-mell of newly winged angels. I play My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama on my pyrite-plated kazoo, interchanging guitar with kazoo, of course. Are you dazzled by my caterpillar-skinned leotard? When I Watusi, are you left breathless? I am the wisteria under your window, which you take as a slow fire engulfing your house in purple and white flames. And I'll just read one more short poem.
Yeah.
This is in Love Something. There's a series of what I call praise poems. And this is November Praise. The smell of ferns and understory after rain. The tick-tick of stove, flame under kettle. Bing Crosby and not just the Christmas records. Cooking meat slowly off the bone. And every kind of soup and stew. To come this close to nostalgia, but go no further. Leaving behind the boy who wore loneliness like boots too big for his feet. That time of evening when everything turns blue in moonlight, when darkness has yet to consume all for itself.
Well, very good.
Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. I felt like I, visited part of the family tree, and yeah, no, just powerful. I think the quote got it right. I'm glad we read that at the beginning.
Yeah,
Yeah, there is a fearless part to it. There is a, yeah, you just lay it all out there. Very, very moving, very moving.
thank you,
And
thank you.
yeah, and it's okay. You don't have to read light poems. We can go intense here. So, but we have to sign off for today, Wendy, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's 1 o'clock. That was very, very powerful, beautiful. Your work is amazing. Joshua, thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank
all
you.
of us, for joining us, and we will see you next week, I hope.